Welcome to ILTV's Insider. I'm Aaron Porras, and today we have a brand spanking new government, complete with a shiny new prime minister and a whole host of challenges, some old and some new. For one, largely seen as a test of both the new government's policy and resolve, the twice-delayed annual Jerusalem flag parade is now back on, albeit with some alterations to the route. And this as Palestinians call for a day of rage across the West Bank, Gaza, and Arab-Israeli communities. Hamas terrorists in Gaza likewise threatening to renew indiscriminate rocket fire, as well as the use of incendiary and explosive terror balloons. Joining us to discuss is President of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, Dr. Efraim Inbar, and Jeremy Saltan, political strategist and director of English operations for the Yamina Party under new Prime Minister Naftali Bennett. Thank you both so much for being with us today. Dr. Inbar, I want to begin with you. And I want to begin with the philosophical. Do you think that this event, this flag parade, and the resulting threats from Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, as well as the new government's response to it, truly constitute the test of mettle that critics claim it is? And if so, in what way?
Obviously, every new government in Israel is tested by outsiders. And this is its first test. They are checking if Israel will succumb to terrorist threats. And I think the cool response of the government that this type of parade was done before. The security authorities check if there is any danger to public safety, and if the advice of those agencies is that it can be done, the government decided to do it. And there is nothing much to talk about it.
So, Jeremy, would you agree? And again, how do you think that the Lapid-Bennett government is addressing this as opposed to how the Netanyahu government may have addressed it, if different at all?
Well, we saw that when the Netanyahu government had to make a decision if they were going to allow the parade or not, they ultimately made the decision each time not to have the parade. This was something.
The latest delay was really just to approve of a new route with the organizers. It wasn't an outright cancellation.
The latest delay was to put it on Bennett's watch as opposed to being on Netanyahu's watch, and that's fine. And as Professor Inbar said, this is going to be the first test for this government. Look, Homeland Security Minister Omer Bar-Lev, who of course is from the left-wing Labor Party, listened to the police commissioner, he listened to the other various security agencies, and he came to the determination that there was absolutely zero reason to cancel it. And we're moving forward with the parade and the march the same way that it's been done in other years. Of course, at this point, it's already a month after the Jerusalem Day reunification celebration. But every year there's been a parade, and there'll be a parade again this year, just what it appears to be just a month later after the date.
All right, well, in addition to Public Security Minister Bar-Lev, Defense Minister Gantz is also working to increase security in and around Jerusalem, and extra Iron Dome batteries have been deployed. Is this enough to adequately address the threats from Hamas and the Palestinian Authority? And again, in what ways is this new government preparing to address more specifically the divisions and the tensions within Israeli society as opposed to how they were addressed before this new government? Going back to you, Mr. Efraim Inbar.
Well, I think the composition of this government, having 8 parties from a variety of political hues, signals clearly that they can work together, and there is a social resilience for future conflicts. And this is, I think, a good signal. After 2 years of much chaos and heated and acerbic debate and public discourse, so I think this government in particular seems to be able to face challenges from outside with a strong domestic front.
Jeremy, what do you think makes this new government under Bennett and Lapid maybe more or less able to address these challenges, especially given, as Efraim Inbar just said, comes from a very wide range of ideologies within the coalition?
I actually think it's the diversity of the coalition which enables us to be able to deal with issues like this and the big macro issue of being able to heal the nation after all the negativity of the, of course, 4 elections and almost 5 elections over the last 2 years. You know, there's a reason why there's space between each election, and the reason you have a term that is 4 years or more, at least in the ideal, is because you want to have time for the flames to sort of come down. Because unfortunately, one of the aspects of election campaigning is going through the negative campaign process and a lot of spewing of hate and other negative issues. So with the diversity of this coalition, the fact that this is the first true unity government, because it has both Jewish and Arab parties, not just Arab, Knesset members, Jewish and Arab parties here. You have religious and secular, you have right and left, you have native-born Israelis as well as immigrants. You have a real true ability to be able to address a lot of the issues really at the core of Israeli society and be able to heal the nation from a lot of the wounds that we've seen really come to the forefront over the last couple of years.
All right, so more to that point. It's been argued that the unity government has more in common than it does in conflict, as you just outlined. Each party receiving a ministry coinciding with the issues that aren't too controversial to the other parties. This means that where action can be agreed upon and taken, it will be, whereas some big-ticket items like what to do opposite the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza will essentially be put on the back burner. Do you agree with this assessment, Jeremy?
Yeah, look, we agree to disagree on a bunch of issues, and then the rest of the stuff we agree on, and we're going to just move forward and hit the ground running, moving on then. Look, when we give merits to the environment ministry or the health ministry, these aren't issues in which there is a right or a left. The environment is all of ours. The health system is all of ours. We're not going to see a departure from the current health system and an adoption of some capitalist, version of healthcare in this country. So really, definitely from the right wing's perspective, I should say, especially because you have a situation where, thanks to Lieberman being on the Lapid half of the government, that the right wing has a majority in the cabinet, and there's a right wing majority in the security cabinet, that we feel very confident in terms of what we can get accomplished, and also know that the important issues, we have the veto power to be able to stop initiatives that we would not want. And I actually think the fact that there is veto power on both sides strengthens the coalition, because both sides know that besides getting a few brownie points in the newspaper, they won't be able to have any policy accomplishments by causing a lot of trouble.
So how long do you think that can really go on successfully before ministers, and I believe we have 27 ministers and several deputy ministers, how long before they stray away from their respective lanes and really force some of that veto power to be used by either Prime Minister Bennett or alternate Lapid?
I think what it comes down to is how we're able to work together during the initial period of the government, where we try to deliver for each constituency, each one of the 8 parties, and the various accomplishments they were able to get in the coalition agreements. Just implementing that stuff could take us a full year. If we go through this year in which we're able to build on those achievements, we can then go ahead and set new policy objectives to be able to keep this government going. If we see that we have a lot of turbulence and that we have a lot of issues, we have 2 options. One is to try to increase the coalition. And there have been many cases where coalitions have started with 61 seats and grew throughout the term, starting even with Rabin's first term in the 70s. And of course, Netanyahu in 2015 is another example. Or we see that it's not working and we come to some sort of arrangement to end it in a peaceful manner. But I think that I'm very optimistic that because everyone has what to gain based on these coalition agreements, that people are going to make sure that they get these accomplishments from the paper into actual, reality. And I think that if we're able to do this in a normal way and we're able to see leadership from all sides, we can keep this ball running towards the end of the time of this government.
So I've actually...
I would like to add maybe
please.
that the glue, that most important glue that keeps this coalition together is Netanyahu. After all, this is an anti-Netanyahu bloc, and as long as he is the head of the opposition, they'll do everything possible to keep him in that position.
Well, I was just going to ask about that, actually, about a similar issue. Columnist for Newsweek, Mark Schulman, he writes that while the change bloc succeeded in removing Netanyahu from power, quote, unless these leaders can show that they have the flexibility to work together for the common good, their political careers will be effectively over. Is mutually assured destruction a recipe for resounding success, or for maybe just doing enough to not dissolve? Dr. Inbar?
Well, I have a very skeptic view of what government should do. The less they do, the better. So with this government, I think there is a very low, common denominator, which means that there will be no drastic decisions, and they will try to do as little as possible as their differences of opinion will allow. And this is not necessarily bad news for the country.
Are you saying essentially that the new government is benefiting from low expectations?
Yes, definitely.
Jeremy, do you take that as a positive, or as an insult, really, that the expectations are low for the government?
Aaron, I don't know how many times I was in studio explaining that Naftali Bennett was running to be prime minister, and people thought that was a joke and they didn't take that seriously. I don't know how many pundits I've heard, including, Barak Ravid, who supposedly knows everything, who gave the chances of us passing the confidence vote at 30%. So, I'll say, with all the cynicism and all of these experts and all these pundits and all the talking heads, we've just constantly shown that we've been right and they've been wrong. And I have a lot of optimism in the fact that we have a very good team behind us, and that we have the ability to be able to maybe not go the complete distance, but definitely go a lot further down the lane than the majority of all of the so-called analysts believe that we will go.
All right, well, so there are some other challenges that are, of course, facing this new government, including, in some cases, contradictory policies and promises. For example, Finance Minister Avigdor Lieberman wants to avoid tax hikes, while Transportation Minister Michaeli wants to increase investments in her sector, especially for transportation on the weekend, things like that. And that really, again, I think boils back down to the budget, or the lack thereof, that needs to be passed really in this first year, as you said, Jeremy. So again, I see some real big conflicts right here, right off the bat. How do you plan to address them?
So, the number one thing that we need to do, and this is a big reason of why we formed this government, is to pass 3 state budgets over the next 6 months, which is an accomplishment that I don't think any other country has ever gone through. So that will be a lot of fun for us on the policy side. Look, the coalition agreements at times do have contradictory segments to them, and that's why you have the Yamina Yesh Atid, who are the 2 pillars of this coalition government, that says whenever there's a disagreement between what's written in one coalition agreement or another, that it's the Yamina Yesh Atid one that is going to be the one that takes the day in terms of what the actual policy is.
Well, so in this, so what about in this case between the finance ministry and the transportation ministry?
What it comes down to when you're going through a state budget is you have to be dealing with both your expenses and your revenues, and you have various projections, and you have different ways to go about how to, if you will, cross the T's and dot the I's. I am quite confident that everyone understands each one of the ministries is going to have some sort of growth. We're not going to see here a situation where a ministry goes into negative, with the exception, of course, of the ministries that we got rid of that were unnecessary, such as the Strategic Affairs Ministry or the Water Ministry or other such ministries that absolutely had no place, in our opinion, within Israeli society. And just cutting those obviously saves us, hundreds of millions of shekels. And there are plenty of other places to be able to cut the fat so that you can have the increases where you need to have them and cut where you need to. And obviously, when it comes to the priorities that are written, in some of these coalition agreements, of upgrading infrastructure, of building additional universities, hospitals. We're talking about the Galil, the Negev. I think everyone understands that's a long-term investment within Israeli society and our future. That shouldn't just be looked upon as something that's going to put us in a higher deficit or something that's going to put us in the hole. It's something that's beneficial, and we'll be able to reap the benefits from that, both from the public services perspective, but also from the economic perspective down the line.
Dr. Inbar, how do you respond to the format within which Jeremy just explained this government will likely operate?
I think that all budgetary disagreements are eventually resolved.
Do you agree that these types of contradictions in coalition agreements exist in every government?
Definitely. Each minister wants a larger portion of the budget to go
to
his
a larger
own
portion,
minister.
yes, but we're talking about things that some of these parties are ideologically diametrically opposing one another on.
So I think each one of those parties went into the government knowing and saying it openly that they'll have to compromise. And usually in this type of discussions, what determines the outcome is, of course, the relative power of each politician, with, of course, an advantage to the treasury, that they claim, professional authority. But otherwise, it's a well-known game. Each politician plays it, sometimes less successfully, sometimes more successfully. And even if he loses, he always can claim a victory because he can say it could have been much worse.
All right, so then we also have another contradictory promise. You have Meretz, Israel Beitenu, and Labor. They want to impose core studies on the Haredi sector. They want to advance rights for the LGBT community and for public transportation and opening stores on the Sabbath. Prime Minister Bennett hinted that he may veto many of these agreements. It's also been argued that the Islamist Ram party, with respect to the LGBT rights, will fight against that. How do you see that being resolved, Jeremy?
I think, again, through the same way we were able to get everyone to sign the coalition guidelines and the coalition agreements, by sitting around the table, being very real about what you're trying to achieve, what you're willing to compromise on, where your red lines are, and what are the main policy objectives or budgetary objectives that you're looking to.
So are any of these red lines of Bennett's, for example, LGBT rights and recognition, imposing core studies on the Haredi and the ultra-Orthodox sector, is that a red line for Bennett, or is that something that you think that he could compromise on?
Look, we said when it comes to issues of religion and state very clearly where our priorities are. My good friend Matan Kahana, who's the new religious services minister, he has three main priorities in terms of reforming conversion, reforming kosher, kashrut, and also changing the way that we choose the chief rabbi to help us enable us to be able to put in a Zionist chief rabbi. These are three areas where we know that we want to have reforms. It's very clear based on other coalition agreements, there are other parties that have other ideas when it comes to making changes in the status quo. They're going to have our approval to be able to go through that process. Some of the things are more realistic. Some of the stuff are less realistic. I'm not going to talk about each specific thing individually, but I can tell you that beyond the three reforms that I spoke about, there is what to talk about. There are compromises that can be made. What it comes down to is, again, not showing your cards, certainly not on your television show. I'm sorry, Aaron, but going and doing so within the room, the negotiating room, and coming out with a win-win situation where, again, each one of the 8 parties can say that they can claim a victory for their constituency and make sure that no party is going over any one of their red lines. And again, I'm well aware of the atmosphere and what everyone else is saying and all of the people who are going against us. But what it comes down to is I have a lot of faith that we'll be able to hold the line and we'll be able to deal with all these obstacles that are in front of us. I'm very cautiously optimistic that, like I said, we are going to go quite further than most analysts believe that we will.
All right, well, I'm going to turn now to Dr. Inbar for some analysis. We'll see what he thinks. Arguably the biggest issue facing this coalition is just the gaining of the necessary numbers to pass legislation in the Knesset. Several members, like Nir Orbach and now Eli Avidar, are wavering in their support. The coalition will need to go out and secure at least one more voice for every single vote in order to get to 61, or they could open themselves up to a vote of no confidence. Do you think that this risk will prevent major, even remotely controversial agendas from hitting the plenum?
First of all, I don't know how responsible those MKs are and how faithful they are to their parties. But it's quite clear that a very narrow coalition has some problems. Although historical analysis of this type of coalitions in parliamentary systems does indicate that they are stable. But of course, this is the rule, and there are always exceptions to the rule. The mere very narrow alliance of those parties, on one hand, brings them together, but on the other hand, each MK is a king, and he can make a muscle in order to try to get money for his pet project. So we'll see those two tendencies, and it remains to be seen if the heads of those coalitions and heads of the parties in this coalition will be able to rule over MKs with great appetite.
All right, so I guess we'll see very soon if some biting legislation will ever hit the plenum floor during this coalition, or if the new change bloc will play it somewhat safe. At any rate, thank you so much, Dr. Efraim Inbar and Jeremy Saltan, for joining us. Everybody watching at home, I'm Aaron Porras. Please tune in next time on Insider for more on everything Israel. If there's a topic that you'd like us to cover next, let us know about it in the comment sections online. And finally, for more news from Israel, follow ILTV on Facebook and Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube and our ILTV.tv channels. Thank you so much. Be well. We'll see you soon.